The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One?
Yeah, we go to town on it.
Okay, you're very welcome back to the F1 Pod on Off the Ball, available weekly on Wednesdays after F1 race weekends in the F1 Pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed as well. Wherever you get your podcasts, the F1 Pod on Off the Ball, brought to you by Chicago Town Pizza, real takeout taste for less with Chicago Town. Myself, Shane Hannon, with you as per usual this week. Keep your questions coming in on the Twitter at ShaneHannon01 and comments and thoughts on the YouTube channel as well. Delighted to welcome back for this week's episode. We have Bernie Collins, the F1 pundit and former strategy engineer, who was most recently head of race strategy for the Aston Martin Formula One team. And for a first appearance, Nadia El Ferdaoussi, travel and lifestyle influencer and F1 fanatic as well. Bernie and Nadia, how are things?
Yeah, good, thank you, Shane.
Welcome aboard, Nadia, to the first episode. You're an admirer of Bernie's work from a distance, I think, as well, as we all are on television these days.
Yeah, I really am. And Bernie, like every weekend that you're there with Sky, you can just see the feedback from everybody is saying that that's what was missing before. And I'm a new fan, so I'm learning loads from your insights, but I think it's old fans as well that just didn't understand all of those. You really break it down very easily for us to understand all of the strategy stuff. And I know that you've always kind of give the disclaimer, oh, tire chat can be boring, but not with the last race weekend anyway.
I have to do the disclaimer because I can see the guys in the commentary box just like their eyes rolling over when I do it. I don't think it's boring, but thank you for the support. Like the support from home in particular has been great. You know, you get messages every weekend, and it's really positive to see. So long may it continue.
What's your race going schedule like, Nadia? Do you get to many Formula One races? Is it a case of watching on TV, or what's your fandom been like? What's the story of your fandom?
I made it to my first track, Silverstone, this year, and I just went for the Friday. And I'm going to be honest with you, it was so overwhelming that I left on the Friday and didn't go back. I just wanted to watch it on TV. So I only started watching last year, and I just love my race weekends at home, being able to hear the commentary and watch every part of it. Like if I'm at home, I will watch every part of practice and the whole 9 yards. I actually missed Ted's notebook this week. Hopefully he's back soon. But yeah, I'm thinking of going to Kota, so something a little different. But I love watching it. It's the first question everybody asks me: have you been, or are you going to Monaco? But I don't know. I like to be able to. I definitely have to watch the race again if I was there live.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think you've mentioned Kota, haven't you, before, Bernie, as one of the. I think you said it's one of the good ones in terms of the social life, I guess, in Austin as well.
Yeah, Austin's a really interesting city. Like it's an interesting one in that it's a little bit out of the center of the city, so there's a bit of like transport back and forth, but they sort of do a big concert at the track and things. I sort of agree with Nadia saying, like, whenever I've been to a race or stood in the grandstand, sometimes you feel a little bit disjointed from what's happening, so you need to be, I felt, a bit careful that you're opposite a screen or opposite the pit lane or something, so that you can at least get more of a feel of what's going on. Or it's a bit like, I guess we all have experienced in our own lives of, for me, it's been sat in football stadiums where you've got, you know, the older guy sat next to you with his radio, but he actually knows what's going on. So everyone's asking him what's, you know, happening. So I do think it's one of those things where, yeah, it's sort of the right setup, but you struggle to get network for your phone to do your timing app or whatever it might be. But there's a different experience in terms of hearing the cars and getting the atmosphere. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's probably a victim of its own success, Formula One, in some ways, because it's been such a good sport to watch on TV, and the TV coverage is so excellent, and the punditry is excellent, and even the ability to hear the car radios, I guess, Nadia, as well, means that when people go to an actual track, sometimes they're like, oh Jesus, I'm not getting all the coverage that I usually get at home.
Yeah, well, my friend was there this weekend, and I was kind of filling her in on what was going on. You know, she was going during the red flag, are we starting back again? Or, you know, I was actually able to tell her faster than she was getting the information at the track.
It's mad. It's crazy. And I can understand the Silverstone thing as well. I've never been, but I remember, was it John Watson was on one of the episodes with us recently, and he was basically describing it as a festival. You know, it's essentially a festival with a race going on around it. So it's one of those race weekends that I can imagine overwhelming is probably a good word to use, Nadia.
Yeah, and also the weather, you know, this weekend didn't look like the one that you want to be sitting in the grandstands, but those Dutch fans, you know, they were just dancing and happy and smiling the whole weekend, weren't they?
Well, this weekend's a difficult one because my other half was actually in the grandstand for a lot of it, but there was a lot of photos of some very wet looking lads trying to do their best to stay dry. But I think the atmosphere, was really incredible. And then I think, post that's been a difficult weekend because with all of the flight chaos in the UK, it's been quite difficult to get home. So I think there's a few that are reevaluating what they've done this weekend.
Yeah, a few sorry heads in airports, I'd imagine, across the continent trying to get home after all of that chaos. It's one of those places, Zandvoort, Bernie. Is it enjoyable to prep for as a race strategist, or is it kind of one of those unpredictable places?
It's a very difficult weekend. I think this weekend in particular was very difficult from a strategy side because of the changeable weather conditions. We've had 2 years at Zandvoort. It's been sunny the whole time. So we had a sunny Friday and then into Saturday and Sunday. A few big difficulties being it's a very short track, so things happen very, very quickly. So even in the dry, you're making decisions very quickly. In qualifying, like we've seen some blocking incidents, you're trying to get on top of the traffic very quickly. You're trying to give the driver information in a very short period of time. So it's very hectic from that side, even if it's dry. And then if it's wet, you've got added this element of the rain was predominantly coming across the sea, which is a bit harder to predict because it's just not as clear on the satellite images. And often it was just missing the track because of the wind conditions. So I think it was a really difficult one to make calls from the pit wall. Until Saturday, they'd not had any wet running at Zandvoort. So they never had the crossover conditions. Even into Sunday, we'd never went from inter to dry. So there's a lot of data they didn't really have that you're making up on the fly, which is, I think, why some people got caught out on the switch between inter to dry coming a bit earlier than what people pit stopped. Like I think the guys that stopped first, Alonso, was really, really quick versus the Verstappen and the Perez of the world. And that, I think, caught a little people out how quickly it went to that dry condition.
Crazy. I've almost found at the start of these episodes every week, Nadia, trying to find a new way to talk about Max Verstappen winning a race, which can get quite difficult. And look, those Dutch fans, I'm sure at Zandvoort, were absolutely buzzing at the weekend, regardless of the weather. But I guess he's now equaled this all-time record of 9 victories in a row, 11th win of the season, 138 points is his championship lead now over second place. So, I mean, the Drivers' Championship is all but done. I mean, what more can we say about this guy? He is, in fairness to him, unbelievable.
Yeah, well, I'm a Max fan, so to me, it's not boring. And, because I'm a new fan as well, like I found this difficult getting into this sport, listening to people week in and week out saying, oh, boring race, boring race. Obviously, you couldn't say about this weekend, but I'm brand new, so I'm passionate about it all. But the thing I find with Max is he says he's not interested in the records, but when he got out of the car, he was still making the 9 with his fingers. Like he's obviously very aware of it. But I don't know if that's just his character. Is he trying to be a little bit contrary? Maybe because Lewis is so, the records seem to be so important for Lewis. So maybe that's why Max is saying he's not. But obviously, it's got to mean something to him, especially winning at home as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's just a track, Bernie, he absolutely loves. Like, we'd love at some stage to see a different winner other than Max at Zandvoort. But I mean, there was interesting comments from Fernando Alonso even after the race where he's saying he actually is underrated as a driver, which sounds mad for someone who's just won so many races in a row. But does he have a point there, Alonso?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult because at the minute, we're all saying, or a lot of people are saying, Checo's underperforming in the car relative to Max. But is it that Max is overperforming relative to the car? So without putting a third driver in there, we don't know the answer to that at this stage. We can't say for definite. And even to put a third driver in would be really difficult because they'd need time to get up to speed and all this sort of thing. But you've only got this compare, and it's been sold as, how is Checo doing such a poor job? But actually, is it that Max is doing this really phenomenal job? We know Max is very fast in qualifying. That's been proven time and time again, relentlessly. But his racecraft is also, really improving from a few years ago. The level head on the shoulders. So this is the problem. One of the things with F1, it's not a problem, but we don't have like for compares. It's very difficult to get a good read on a really good driver versus a really good car, all these sorts of things. Like, any of the drivers down the field in lower cars, like, a lot of talk about Piastri. It's very hard to cut through all of that. Max, to do the job he done at home with the pressure, people sort of play down the pressure, but even from an engineering side, it is phenomenal. You get more marketing commitments, more demands on his time, more distractions. So to keep the level head and just get the job done, qualifying was very, very difficult. It came down to one lap at the end to nail it. There was no run up to it. There was no introduction through the day. It was one lap at the end, maximum pressure, let's go. And he absolutely nailed that lap. And that is phenomenal from a driver, in my opinion, with all of the distraction. It's interesting. I think drivers often come out and say, oh, I don't care about that, or that doesn't bother me, or I'm not thinking about that. They are. Checo's thinking about if the seat's safe 100%. That's happening up and down the field where drivers are saying one thing but really thinking another. Because that's the game. That's the marketing game we play. And, maybe Nadia is right a bit of it's a bit of, Lewis, I don't care about this, but we know you do type thing.
Yeah, he seems to be so blasé about it in words and in press conferences for sure. Like, is there a massive gap between himself and Checo Perez? Like, Checo is obviously an unbelievable driver, Bernie, but and someone you'd have worked with, but that's always the I guess accusation put to him, that he's in the same car, so to speak, as Max Verstappen, and yet the gap is so huge.
I think the gap in qualifying, I think it was 1.3 seconds, sits very badly on paper. I think that to get that one lap, to get your braking zone, that's always going to be difficult. And that is going to differentiate a lot of drivers. Checo's never been a strong qualifier. He's always needed to build up to that final lap in qualifying. So this was not in his mind. He knew it was the final lap, but this is more of in his build stage of qualifying than the final lap, whereas Max can just do the lap instantly and doesn't need the laps before. The qualifying would have been a lot closer between the two, in my opinion, had it not been just one single lap on paper. And drivers have different strengths and weaknesses for sure. So I think he's had a few bad races. He's back to the stage of performing reasonably well in that car. He should have been on the podium, bar for the pit lane speeding incident. He did very well in terms of the calls to get onto the inters and going forward from that. So I think it was a strong weekend for him. It just doesn't show as well on the paper as it did, in real life.
Like, I guess, Nadia, the one thing is it highlights that Sebastian Vettel record from 2013, which has stood since then, these number of race wins in a row. Like, allows us to talk about Vettel a little bit again and kind of rave about his achievements, because you probably appreciate them more now than at the time, because clearly it's taken a decade to break that record, and stands testament to what Sebastian Vettel achieved.
Yeah, especially with more races now and the car being more reliable and everything. So his 9 probably is worth a lot more than Max's 9 at the moment. But let's see what Max goes on to do. He could win the whole rest of the season. He could wipe the floor. Or what about the Monza curse? Maybe his reign ends next week.
I wonder, that is that a case for Max fans as well, Nadia, like yourself, like that possibility, which is a distinct possibility, that Max wins every single race of this year, of this season. Like, is that what the fans want? Do they want a complete clean sweep, or is it a case that a lot of Max fans now want a little bit, maybe more competition? Because that Lewis Hamilton year where it went down to the final race was unbelievable.
I think we'd like to see a bit more racing. So whether that's with his teammate or if it's Lando or Alonso, I think, especially like you said, Alonso giving Max the compliment there, it would be great to see those two racing. It would be great to see Alonso get a win this season. And then I'd like to see if their friendship dynamic changes, or same with Lando, So no, we would. I think any F1 fan would like to see a bit more racing.
Bernie, I know you were keen to highlight the swing in fortunes for Pierre Gasly and his team, because we were just talking about them on recent episodes, and the turnaround has been quite dramatic.
Yeah, I think when you think that team sacked, for want of a better word, a number of people on the pit wall at the end of, or just before the shutdown, so at the Budapest Spa weekend, and then to go on to have a podium this weekend. Now, a lot of things fell their way, but I don't know Gasly on a personal level, but there have been a number of times where Gasly has made some really strong strategy decisions that I think have really stood well. And this weekend was one of them, in terms of the first call to move to intermediate, really strong on that. And then again later on in the race, I think the second call to move to intermediate again. So seemed to be two working really well together. The car's obviously there if they can get all the ducks in a row, so to speak, over race weekend. So a phenomenal result for that team. Now, that's not purely because of any changes on the pit wall in a one race. Nobody has that. Well, I don't think people have that much of an effect on what's happening. But it is interesting to see that the performance at times is there, and the team, the background team, is in a position to make the most of the opportunities that come their way. So it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes going forward.
Yeah, and he's one of these drivers as well, Nadia, that a bit like Max drives on the limits, which is, I mean, as a fan, brilliant to see. And there's always these little moments and incidents in races involving Gasly the odd time, which, like, I mean, highlights the need to be like that, be a little bit of aggressive as a Formula One driver as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love his driving style. And I think a lot of people forgot this weekend, he also had the 5-second penalty. So you just remember, like, crossing the line, they swapped him and Checo, but he served his 5-second penalty too. So they were kind of even. But, you know, it was great to see him there. And obviously he was also third in the sprint, Spa, I think it was, but he didn't get the podium for that. So it's really nice. I think it definitely have to give the team a bit of a boost. But it's strange. It seems to be that it's only one of them that's doing well, Ocon or Gasly. And it kind of goes back and forth, but it's never the two at the same time.
That's a strange one, isn't it, Bernie? Like, Nadia brings up a good point. Like those, I guess, teams that can be a little confusing at times, where one driver does well, the other doesn't, and it seems to be a mix-up. They can't seem to peak both at the same time.
Well, yeah, and I think that's up and down the pit lane this week. That's very similar. So there's a lot of compares that are the same. So Gasly, Ocon, Alonso and Lance Stroll. The two Mercedes drivers, different fortunes as well. So, and a lot of it came down through that first pit stop, whether the driver or the team was brave enough to pit lap one or ended up waiting a few laps. You know, the Alonso Stroll example is quite striking. I think Alonso was one of the first people to pit onto the intermediate, Stroll one of the last. And actually the timing of Stroll's one was really poor in that they'd done a number of laps on the wrong tyre, then aborted to the right tyre way too late, whereas the likes of Albon realised the decision was wrong, but sort of stuck with it and managed to come out the other side. So it's really, there seems to be a lot of, particularly in these changeable conditions, getting everyone onto the same page, and that relationship where the driver's able enough to speak up loudly enough for what he wants, what he feels on the track, and the team are fit to react well to that. So I don't know if that's an indication of a strong driver or a weak background team, but there was a number of decisions where one side of the pit wall got it really right and one side of the pit wall got it really wrong. And given that the strategy teams are generally shared across both, then it's that relationship with the driver.
And that caused a little bit of disharmony within garages as well, Bernie. Like, when one driver is doing well, other isn't. Like, obviously these things even themselves out over time, but can it create some disharmony?
Oh, for sure, 100%. You know, Gasly will, if you think of Alpine and Aston Martin, the whole garage is celebrating because their bonuses, their championship points is all based on performance of either car. So the entire garage is celebrating. But there will be a number of people that are, you know, the core Stroll group or the core Ocon group that will be really disheartened with the race, how it ended up. You know, Ocon came out and said he was really upset they'd fitted the wet tyre. So, you know, I had it myself in Monaco a few years ago when Checo got his podium. We'd actually tried to make very similar decisions across the car, but it just didn't work out for Hulkenberg, and he got stuck in traffic and he missed his podium. And we all know how keen Hulkenberg is for a podium. Mm-hmm. So you end up with this, even for myself, this split view that you're happy in one light but sad in the other. So you're trying to be happy around some people and sad around other people. So it's really difficult dynamic. And it's really, that few hours after the race are really difficult when you're in that sort of situation where you know potentially a different decision, or even if you push Ocon more into following Gasly's strategy, even if Gasly called it, could you had a very different result for the team, because it's really hard to have these two sides to the same story.
Yeah, for sure. I think Alpine definitely, as you say, deserve the credit at least for getting the act together with Gasly and getting that podium at the weekend. Amazing turnaround for them. Fernando Alonso was someone, Nadia, we should give credit to. I think we all love talking about Fernando Alonso when his name pops up. A just unbelievable performance, and I think he described that move on George Russell in lap one as overtake of the month. Arguably, it could be overtake of the season for some people. Just it's reeling in the ears sort of stuff, isn't it?
I love how he says that about himself as well. He's brilliant. And he also said that he would have went for the overtake on Max at the end, but he was kind of joking that he wanted to be able to get out of the circuit, obviously with all the Max fans there. But it was great to see him get the fastest lap. And I don't know, did Max have anything to say about that? I didn't see anything afterwards. But yeah, he certainly wouldn't have been happy about losing that 1 point.
No, because he definitely seems like a type of driver who wants every single point, even though he's got that, as I said, 138-point lead. Is Fernando one of the drivers you would have been kind of admiring from a distance as well, Nadia? He seems to be one that even the neutrals tend to gravitate towards.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously he's an incredible driver, but I think it's his character too. I like that. I like that he looks like he's really enjoying himself. He looks like he's having fun. He says he's in his peak now or his prime, and it sounds like it, and it looks like it. And the only thing I'm get a bit annoyed with every race weekend is they're always mentioning his age, and he's only what 3 or 4 years older than Lewis. But you know, I think he's definitely quieting down people who think he's getting on. No, he's fun to watch both in the car and outside.
That's a very interesting one, Nadia, as well. The fact that, like, we've had this discussion and off the ball different times in terms of GA players, and even rugby players as well. Like when GA players reach 30 or 31, all of a sudden there seems to be the narrative within the media or wherever else, and even among fans, that the word retirement comes up, and it's almost seen as a dirty word. We seem to retire our sports people quite early or before their time. It probably is more even pertinent now in Formula One, where you see the likes of Alonso and Hamilton, well into their 30s. Some could even do it in their 40s and do it well. So is that an issue that we need to maybe be careful about, retiring our drivers from Formula One before their time?
If he says he's able to do it and he's not showing any signs of slowing down, then you got to trust him and take his word for it. And he's different to the next person. Maybe somebody will lose a bit of speed over time, but yeah, why not? People are living longer, people are healthier, people are fitter. So I don't think there's any reason why you wouldn't see them racing longer as well.
Yeah, here, let them at it. That turn 3 as well, Bernie. That I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation. Hugen Holzbocht. I think I did it okay there, but the Dutch fans can let me know in the comments. But it is an unbelievable corner in Formula One. Like that. That's I'm sure anytime you go back to the Dutch Grand Prix, it's just one of those corners that everyone remembers, and it's a tough one to plan for as well, because anything can happen there.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen a few instances there over the weekend. With, I think it was Piastri that crashed there first, and then followed by obviously Ricciardo with his unfortunate incident. But yeah, it's one of those corners that I didn't actually walk the track this year, but in previous years walking the track is quite phenomenal. The banking, how the corner is set up, it's really interesting, and it's what makes Zandvoort in a way unique, is those types of corners, how the circuit flows. There is a great flow to the track. It's not very stop-start, like some of the other tracks we go to. And at one point I was walking out of the paddock this weekend and I thought, there aren't very many tracks in the world where the fans are stood on a sand dune to get a better view. So it points in sort of infield, there's like some sand dunes that a lot of the people with general admission were just stood up there trying to watch the track. I thought it's a pretty unusual sight. So a lot of the ups and downs are really interesting through that entire setup.
That's an unbelievable opportunity, Bernie, as well, to get, whether it was as your time as a race strategist or even now in the media as well, like getting the chance to walk the track. Like, have there been any tracks that have really surprised you when you've actually walked them? The inclines, obviously the inclines at Spa are famous or infamous, but have any track walks surprised you?
I think the one, Spa, obviously, as you mentioned, people talk about a lot. I think the thing that surprised me at Spa is once you get up to the top of a Rouge, it still keeps going. It's still uphill all the way to that next straight. The one I think that's the most interesting is actually Brazil. There's a lot of elevation change around Brazil, particularly sort of from the last corner up to the start-finish straight. You can actually, on the start-finish straight, see a lot of the circuit from one position. There's a big change even between the pit lane and the grid. So there's quite a big step between the two of those. So it's one that I think doesn't come across on the track. Or I think maybe, was it Portimao we ended up going to last year? Is quite a big difference around the track there. So I think Brazil's the standout one that you don't realise as much on the TV as you do when you're there in it.
That would very much change your experience, I guess, of going to a race if you got the chance to walk it before, and it probably highlights even more so the difficulties and the hills that they're undergoing.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I did see, I think it might have been Ant. He was going around the track with his phone with like a level to show you the incline. And like, that's great. When you see it up close like that, it was crazy because depending on what shot they're showing, you don't necessarily see that, but that's an incredible one.
Yeah, what an experience. Guys, I'm going to take a quick ad break. We'll be back with episode 9 of the F1 pod and Off the Ball very shortly. We have Bernie Collins and Nadia El Ferdaoussi with me, and we'll be back in just a second. Okay, very welcome back to episode 9 of the F1 pod and Off the Ball, weekly between now and the end of the season on Wednesdays after race weekends, live on Wednesdays in the podcast feed, the F1 pod podcast feed that is, and the Off the Ball daily podcast feed as well, wherever you get your podcasts. We have Bernie Collins, the former head of race strategy with the Aston Martin Formula One team, and Nadia El Ferdaoussi, the travel and lifestyle influencer and Formula One fan as well. So we've been kind of analysing and looking back at the Dutch Grand Prix last weekend. We'll take a look ahead to the Italian Grand Prix as well. I guess we should, Bernie, touch on Mercedes. I mean, the rain seemed to probably hamper them the most of the Dutch Grand Prix and possibly the big losers of the day team-wise.
Yeah, I think just not on top of the conditions is really the summary. It's interesting when the list comes up of what everyone's starting on, and there's one person on something different. I've never sat on the pit wall and thought, oh, we nailed it, we're doing something different to everyone else. I've always sat on the pit wall and thought, what have we missed? Like, why are we the only person on this tire? And I'm sure that felt the same, although people were assuming they would survive the rain in the opening stint, nobody was brave enough to fit the medium apart from Hamilton. And if you're trying to get through some wet conditions, that's not the tire to be on. And even from Friday, the medium didn't look like a strong tire anyway. So I'm not sure where that went wrong. I can understand in a perfect dry race, maybe you want to run it a bit longer than someone else. But there's got to be a bit of a reaction of, oh God, we've done something different to absolutely everyone else. And then it just seemed to snowball from there. The medium wasn't going to survive the wet. George stayed out too long. Then you try and recover by going onto the hard tire and running long. It just seemed to get away from them. And I've had a Germany race where I've been in that example where decisions have gone wrong and you've gone further and further back. And then how do you recover from that? And yes, they did recover a little towards the end with the final opportunity to get onto Inters again. But yeah, it just didn't seem to be a very smooth weekend in what I think the pace earlier in the weekend looked reasonably hopeful and the drivers sounded pretty hopeful.
Yeah, it was a strange weekend for them strategy-wise even as well. Like, and Nadia, the one thing that people point out, and I heard it mentioned across the weekend as well, is Lewis Hamilton's future with Mercedes. And it seems to be an ongoing situation. Find himself chasing Carlos Sainz for 5th, no way through, has to settle for 6th. But no word yet on a new deal for Hamilton at Mercedes next year. Like, do you expect or reckon he'll stay put at Mercedes or look for a challenge elsewhere? It's hard to know where he'd go.
Yeah, exactly. It is hard to know where he'd go. Helmut Marko has already said it's not Red Bull. They don't want a challenger for Max anyway. But I think he's loyal. I don't know him, but I think he'll stay. I think he wants that 8th. But Russell could be challenging him too if they get the car right. So it's even if they get the car right next season or the year after, it's not guaranteed. All that's sticking out in my head from Russell at the weekend was I was forecast the podium.
Yeah.
So he'll have competition there for sure.
That's the thing. Like Russell, like they've built up a nice little rapport, the two of them there. And the thing about George Russell, Nadia, is he doesn't want to settle to be, Hamilton's number 2 driver or Mercedes' number 2 driver. He very much seems to have the necessary ego, I guess, to battle Lewis and try and become the number 1 there.
Yeah, I think so. And, like we were saying with Alonso and, not nearing retirement, I think Lewis would be the same. I think he still has the hunger for it, I think. He doesn't seem to be slowing down. And I'd say he wants to see it through and see this Mercedes come back strong.
He's got the young drivers, Bernie, like George Russell being one of them, but like even in qualifying, some impressive performances from Lando Norris, from Alex Albon, and I mean, Albon starts 4th, finishes 8th. We've talked about him a little bit on the podcast, but possibly driver of the weekend after Verstappen, maybe.
Yeah, and Albon just seems to be getting stronger and stronger. I seen him in the paddock a few times over the weekend. He looked so cool and in control, and like nothing was phasing him really. He always looks really happy. Like he just looks happy to be there. But he did a really good job. Williams, we've seen good performances on Friday. I think Williams did a good job with the car this weekend. It seemed like on Friday they'd ran lower fuel than others, higher engine mode, did their qualifying practice early in the weekend. Then others didn't get the qualifying practice in P3 with it being wet. So as a team, they really came together and got the right answers. And then Albon was fit to make that happen, on Saturday in qualifying. And then, in a way, carry that on through. But to get two of their drivers into Q3 is no mean feat, particularly with how tight the midfield is. So they look like a team on the up, and that turnaround seems to have come reasonably quickly. Now, it's not to McLaren's degree, but there's improvements coming there. And Albon seems really comfortable in that team, really settled. I imagine it's a bit like any of the number one drivers within a team, building the team around him, building the setup around him. Everything's moving forward together. James Vowles there now to be making his mark internally. So it's really looks really positive for them from where it was a few years ago.
Yeah, because even the fact that they'd be disappointed with where Albon finished maybe highlights how far they've come, and even from a strategy perspective, Bernie, like to get 44 laps, I think it was, out of those soft tires. Quite a remarkable achievement for Albon, because you can't underestimate that. People always love when we talk about tires, and I'm not even joking. I think the tire talk has become sexy in Formula One over the last number of months.
Well, it's the interesting thing is that like that is just a strength of that team adapting to what's going on, because you've put on a soft tire in wet conditions. So you have this very, very gentle introduction, because you're not quite doing the lap time that you would be doing in qualifying or in normal race conditions. You're going a lot slower. There's a lot less energy. It's a lot, less harsh environment. So that's what leads to the tire being able to extend. And Williams, in Canada proved it as well. They're just on top of if they think that's possible and how long it's going to go, or at least prepared to give it a risk. It's interesting that, this last weekend with the rain coming, every team was on top of that it was going to rain at the end of the race. I didn't see anyone get caught out by that. But very few were confident enough that the tyre could make it all the way there. Whereas Williams seemed to be, more in tune with that. So it's really interesting for them.
That's something, Nadia, that you've noticed as well, even about the Formula One coverage, that it needs people like Bernie as well to explain these things that maybe we often talk and listen about some of the wider range things, the drivers and how they're feeling, and the battles between team principals. But some of the technical stuff maybe was over our heads for a lot of the, I guess, weekend tune-in Formula One fans. But now it's kind of becoming a little bit more easy to understand, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. Because when I started watching, after every single race, I would have a list of questions to Google and trying to find the answers to. But now I'm getting them from the commentary, genuinely. Actually, on that, I did have a question for you, Bernie, about the weather radar. Do all the teams get the same? Is it from F1, FIA? Because they seem to be interpreting it very differently.
Yeah, so we can do just a load of questions. They do all get the same. So they're all provided with Météo France, provided that it's that standard screen that you see on the commentary. But a lot of it comes down to interpretation. So Météo France will draw on a line of where they think the rain is flowing. But I used to spend days, and they got a lot of practice on Saturday figuring out, well, when rain starts in this location, it tends to move north of the circuit, or when rain starts in this location, it tends to hit the circuit. So it's not just something that you can pick up and it will give you the right answer. You need to be really aware of where you think the general movement of rain goes, how you think it moves. It tends to build and change a little bit as well. So the more practice that you can get at it, the better. Being Irish, I've had a bit of practice at that. But it is one of those things where it is possible to get the wrong answer. And it's always really unfortunate when you take a still shot of the radar afterwards. It's always clear what was going to happen then. But you're taking that in as an extra data source to all the stuff that you do on a standard weekend. So as well as the interpretation of it, it's having your team set up well enough that someone has the overhead to just monitor the radar, do the radar on a few other things, because often it gets left as an extra that nobody's really on top of, and everyone's pretty overloaded in their standard weekend anyway. So this extra massive thing, you need to have a really good method of making sure 3 people aren't sort of watching it, but one person's watching it really closely.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's such an important aspect as well that maybe we don't think about too often, looking from the outside in, or from the outside in. It's basically one of those things that needs someone like yourself, Bernie, to explain to us plebs, I think, outside of the sport.
You're being very harsh on yourself there, I think.
I know, but it's fair. It's fair. The one man who will be disappointed to be missing the Italian Grand Prix, no doubt, is Daniel Ricciardo. This broken hand he sustained in an accident at Zandvoort, of course, on Friday, the second practice at that banked Hugenholtz corner. And Christian Horner said he had this operation on Sunday to insert screws into the bone, which all apparently went well, and it's all about recovery. Again, Nadia, another man that larger than life character, and has brought that appeal back to regular Formula One fans as well, because he's been there, done that. He's won races in the past, so someone that I guess the sport needs.
Yeah, I definitely think it's one of the reasons that Red Bull had him back as their reserve or third driver, because it seems everybody wants him around, and yeah, like from Drive to Survive, obviously he was one of the biggest and the main characters. It was so unlucky. He'd just come back, so I don't know what's going to happen now, because Liam Lawson did pretty well, didn't he? And he beat Yuki, and if Checo's not doing great, maybe they'll be looking for him in Red Bull next year. So I feel bad for Daniel Ricciardo at the moment. But, he's been to the same surgeon as Lance Stroll, who was back racing so fast after both wrists. So maybe a couple of weeks and he'll be fine.
And no harm as well having a driver from, I guess, a country that can be underrepresented in New Zealand as well, with Liam Lawson, Nadia. Like, I guess it increases the interest there, as you say. Like, comes in on Saturday, finishes 13th on Sunday. Quite a remarkable achievement for someone who's just thrust into the whole thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine the pressure and all of the conditions of this particular race weekend as well. He only had that one practice session, but it was quite good to see. And now it's not great for Charles Leclerc, obviously, and he had damage to the floor, but he got an overtake on him. Obviously, he lost the pace back, but he's got such an amazing record, winning. Was it 8 different series on debut? He was never going to win this race, but I think he can be pretty proud of that result.
100%. Interested to see what he does at the Italian Grand Prix, certainly this weekend. It's funny because Bernie, the BBC did a kind of piece where they were listing all the Formula One driver injuries that have happened. Broken bones, they say, take about 6 weeks to heal. But even at the start of the season, you had Lance Stroll in the Bahrain Grand Prix, 12 days after 4 fractures in his hands, wrists and feet. You had Alex Albon racing for Williams in Singapore 3 weeks after an operation to remove his appendix, which seems extraordinary. And even Fernando Alonso a couple of years ago as well takes part in preseason testing just a month after he broke his jaw in that cycling accident. Like, the recovery efforts of Formula One drivers just seems remarkable.
Yeah, and I think that's born out of there's this incredible pressure to do well, to beat the competition. In Ricciardo's case, to not lose his seat. If in 4 races time Lawson looks pretty incredible, Lawson has a lot going for him. He's a young driver. He can bring on the program. There's more life in him, if you think of it that way, which is a bit harsh, but that's how people think. That was the world. It's a very cutthroat industry. You can't miss 4 or 5 races in a year and expect your seat still to be there when you come back. Unfortunately, now this is really unfortunate, because some of those incidents were extracurricular activities, which arguably the driver just had himself to blame. Ricciardo was unfortunately caught up in a live racing incident that resulted in this injury, and there's not a lot that Ricciardo really could have really done to avoid it. A lot of discussion of moving his hand off the steering wheel quicker or whatever, but that's life. It's not something that he's done dangerously outside the sport that's jeopardized his career. It's just a situation he's found himself in. But those guys will be very, very keen to try and get back as quickly as possible, because the world doesn't stay stagnant for very long, and things will move on and people will progress and everything will change. So he'll be really keen to get back as quickly as he possibly can.
100%. One team we haven't mentioned to date, Nadia, is Ferrari, and again, it's just one of those, I suppose, interesting teams that their strategy certainly last year was coming into question for a lot of races, and then we had the pit stop mess that was at the weekend. And Ferrari just seemed to be dropping into the pack a little bit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I know that Charles came out and said I think so, that he said like he called late for the wets, but it was raining. Why did they not have the tires? You could see. So it just doesn't look great. And then going into Monza now next, I don't know how much more Charles can take, but he's locked in, isn't he? He's what is it, the longest Ferrari contract? Bit of talk with Carlos and Audi, I think. But there's sometimes you don't even see them on the coverage, because I think at the start of the season, everyone was saying, what's happened? Why are they not doing better? And now it's kind of dropped off. And that's not what you want. You don't want people not talking about you. But that's kind of what's happening.
100%. Like that's the worst possible thing when they're not talking about a team. And Bernie, that the fact is they've only 3 podiums this season. They're 4th in the Constructors' Championship. So you can see why people aren't talking about them as much. But it's going to be tough for them to turn around the season between now and the end.
And they just, when you hear, I think it was Charles came out in one of the interviews this weekend and said they know what's wrong with the car, but they don't think they can fix it by the end of the season. Like, that just sounds a bit desperate almost. He doesn't sound very hopeful for, they're saying Monza will be better because it suits the characteristics of the car better. So, okay, down to circuit characteristic, maybe one race will be better or not. But they don't sound particularly hopeful that they're going to bring an upgrade and turn their year around. And that's a pretty poor situation for a team like Ferrari to be in, with the resource they have behind them. Arguably should have one of the best driver pairings on the grid, and then not fit to really make use of it. And the problem for someone like Leclerc is, where do you go? Like, where is the step? Max is pretty rooted in Red Bull. Hamilton likewise in Mercedes. If you want to be a number 1 driver, you need Ferrari to step up. That's where it has to happen for Leclerc, regardless of the contract. All these drivers and teams there's always, despite what the contract may say, a potential to wiggle out of it. But, maybe even McLaren are fully sorted with Norris, I think. So that it's very, barring Alonso leaving Aston, that's going to be the next position in a reasonably strong team that's available for what we can see. And that's why we're discussing that around now. There's generally all the driver market chat that's not happening this year, but I don't think there is a lot of movement to be had currently. So the Ferrari stuff just they seem a bit lost as a team. And I worry that the solution is going to be just sack someone else at the top of the end of this year and try someone again next year. But that's not making any difference, I don't see, to the results.
100%. And they just seem like one of those teams that are just a lot of troubles behind the scene. And ironically, they're one of the teams possibly with the 2 drivers on more of an equal footing than some other teams. It probably leads us nicely into a preview of the prediction time as well for the Italian Grand Prix upcoming this weekend. When you look at last year at Monza, like Ferrari qualified in 1st and 3rd, Leclerc 1st, Verstappen 2nd, Sainz qualified in 3rd. And then for the race itself, they didn't have a bad weekend at all. Verstappen ultimately wins the race. Leclerc gets 2nd. George Russell in his Mercedes finishes the podium, but you had Sainz in 4th and Hamilton in 5th. It's always a mad weekend, this one as well, and it's always enjoyable. Nadia, how do you see this one going? We usually do a little predictions thing where I kind of keep tabs of them, but how do you see maybe the podium going? I guess the winner, you don't get any bonus points for predicting Max as the winner, for example.
How about we have Alonso as the winner? Why not?
Brilliant. Go for it.
Yeah. Maybe something happens with Max. My prediction last weekend was that George was going to take Max out on the first lap, and we'd have Lando winning and Alex on the podium. But would love to see a Lando podium. Would love to see an Alex podium. But no, realistically, maybe Alonso. You'd love to see one of the Ferrari drivers up there, but if last week is anything to go by this whole season, it's not looking good. It was great to see 6 different teams qualifying at the top last week, so I'd love to see a mixed up grid again like that. But no, I'll stick with Alonso, and then let's go Lewis and Lando.
Oof. I like the look of that podium. Like that's the thing. In Monza, sometimes you can get a nice, rare podium, I suppose, which is always nice to see. But how do you see it going, Bernie?
For podium prediction, let's come back to that. But there's a few things for Monza going into, just as like a summary. There's a lot of talk already about changeable weather conditions. I think we've not had someone said the other day, we've not had a dry race since Baku, a fully dry race weekend since Baku. So there's people in the pit lane like desperately looking for just a straightforward weekend. We've got the alternative tyre allocation again. So the guys are doing the qualifying on the hard, medium, soft if it's not wet. So there's a few things happening that could change it about. It's very different track to Zandvoort, generally a one-stop. And obviously the tow really important. So people that can set up their car for that, which is going to be interesting if Williams can keep their straight line speed that they've had in previous races. Can they do well there, given how things is going? I'm just going to not put Max winning because I just would like to see something different. So I'll say, I'd love to see Alonso win, but I'm not going to say the same as Nadia. So I'm going to say Checo for the win, turn it around. Then I'm going to put Alonso, and then I'm going to put Leclerc, and hope the Ferrari can make it happen.
Yeah, well, look, the pressure does be on, but then they have that home support as well. You don't know what impact that has, but they seem to pull it together. They certainly pulled it together last year at Monza. I'm also going to leave Max off. We might as well just leave him off. I mean, come on. It's boring otherwise, I think. I have a feeling for an Alex Albon podium, which is a random one. I'm going to put him third. I'm going to put Leclerc second, and I'm going to agree with you, Bernie. I think it could be a big weekend for Checo. Now all of this is probably contingent on Max Verstappen crashing out or not having not finishing the race, because the reality is if he finishes the race, he probably wins. But at least it would keep it interesting. Either way, like as you said, to have a bit of changeable weather probably adds a bit of spice.
Yeah, I'd love to see Albon on the podium. I think that would be like such a fairy tale story for Williams as well.
Be amazing, 100%. Well, listen, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure having you both on the pod this week. We'll no doubt catch up again soon. So thanks a million for hopping on.
Thanks so much. That was great.
Brilliant stuff. Thoroughly enjoyed it. That was Bernie Collins, the former head of race strategy for the Aston Martin Formula One team, and we had Nadia El Ferdaoussi as well, the travel and lifestyle influencer and Formula One fan as well. That's episode 9 of the F1 Pod and Off the Ball in the books, weekly between now and the end of the season on Wednesdays in the F1 Pod podcast feed and the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you again next week to review the Italian Grand Prix. Good luck.
The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One.
Yeah, we go to town on it.